Rime of the Frostmaiden, Chapter 3, Sunblight. This chapter of this campaign deals with the location known as Sunblight and is named after the duergar who is the lord of that location, Zardarok Sunblight, the boss of this location, as well as his close family and his followers, most of which are duergar, or creatures associated with duergar. This particular part of Rime of the Frost Maiden is written for characters around levels 5 through 6. Now, as we get in here, let's go up. You can see the image here of the front of Sunblight. It is a 3-storied dungeon crawl fortress located within the mountains of the spine of the world south of Icewind Dale. And if I switch here, you can see the player's map. Bottom level has the largest section of the map, which includes an Underdark exit or entrance. The middle level here, which has the main entrance, X1, and also the top level, which has a lot of the controls for opening up a hatch in the very top of the building or structure. You can see it right here, where the Chardelin dragon escapes from and may return from. Now, going into the adventure, this, of course, is when the player characters are arriving here, possibly during a blizzard, and coming up the slopes to the main entrance. It's a very foreboding location, as you can see by the image. Now, the player characters will likely have heard rumors of this location, that some fortress lies in the mountains to the south of Icewind Dale, or they may have picked up information from the duergar outpost, one of the adventures early in the campaign in the first chapter, which might suggest that there are a larger fortress out there somewhere, maybe a correspondence between Zardarok and one of the duergar that are living in that fortress, or they may simply hear other rumors. The adventure offers the speaker's quest, which is essentially one of the speakers, likely the speaker of Bryn Chandler, but it could be someone else as well, offers them this lead, mentioning that invisible enemies walk amongst us, etc., and are stealing things and up to no good and seeking Chardalin. And there's one of these duergars was interrogated and gave up the information that there is a Chardalin dragon or some sort of monstrous construct being constructed to be used against the 10 towns of Icewind Dale during the everlasting rime, possibly to destroy the 10 towns. This is a quest where the speakers are desperate and they are asking the player characters for aid, more so for the betterment of the Dale itself. Now, depending on your group, you might have player characters that'll say, well, what do we get in return? Well, the answer is you get to live in the 10 towns still because they are in grave danger. But the DM might want to throw in maybe some treasure or perhaps a lead to some future treasure or treasure location that the speaker knows about. Maybe the speaker knows that there's some magic item that may not be at Sunblight, but maybe they know about one of the remote locations in chapter 2, perhaps the fallen tower that broke off from Yithrin, for example, where there might be some very interesting magic. And if the player characters go to Sunblight and help them, the speaker might reveal the location of that location. Or it could be some other thing. Maybe they have some hidden treasure or something similar, or maybe some connection to the player character's background. And you can do a lot of things with it, obviously. But this is mainly one of those locations where, or quests that the Dale is in danger, severe danger, and the player characters may not realize how bad it might get. And it likely will get bad, as you will see in this campaign or in this particular chapter. Now, Zardorak himself is very paranoid due to the Chardalin magic or the effects of it, and he is going around and pushing people around amongst his comrades, which are duergar. I'll note, by the way, if you're running this adventure but with the book from 2014, The duergar have their own stats in the Monstrous Manual. If you're running it with the 2025 Monstrous Manual, you'll note that duergar are not in the Monstrous Manual, and it makes the suggestion that most duergar should just act as dwarven spies or duergar spies. Many of the duergar in the older version of 5th edition can turn invisible. Actually, they all can. They can turn invisible and they can also enlarge themselves. Now, they don't necessarily have this ability as spies, but you should consider if you want to go with treating them as the spy statistics, give them the enlarge ability as well as the invisibility ability on top of having various resistances being Duergar and maybe raising their challenge rating. I personally would just run them as standard Duergar using the 2014 stats, even if it's 20 you're running 2025 because it works fine. This is from 5e Tools. This example of this adventure, it uses a mix of the 2025 stat blocks as well as the stat blocks from the actual adventure or campaign, such as the stats for Grand Moldova Musgart, who is a relative of Zardarok. And I'll note with her family is from Grockelslug, which that name might sound familiar if you've played Out of the Abyss. And they are merchants, more or less, that make this filthy ale, which doesn't have a name, but it's like a mushroom based ale. I call it Musgart Mushroom Ale, for lack of a better name. And it probably doesn't taste very good, and it probably literally has dirt in it because it's dirty. And I don't know if it really is included much in this adventure, but considering she is from this family that makes this, maybe throw that in a little bit just for storyline. And if you happen to be running a campaign in Grockelslug, throw that in that maybe the Moosegart family comes in just because a little tie-in. And it's also interesting to find unique cultural things like a bizarre mushroom ale found only in one city in the Underdark show up somewhere else in your various campaigns in the north of Faerun. I think this might show up in one of my campaigns pretty soon from now. Now, going into the adventure, like I said, the adventure actually says level 6. You could probably send the player characters in at level 5 if you have a large, consistent group, like say 6, 7 players. If you have 4, make sure they're level 6. If they're not there yet and they want to go there, let them go there anyways. I don't see any problem with it. It's going to be more of a challenge, but the player characters might realize that they're not ready for it yet, and maybe they have to go back, or maybe something terrible happens because something terrible is about to happen. Now, as the player characters go this direction, they might be given an exact location on the map. I personally would not give them the exact location. I would simply tell them that it lies south or somewhere south of East Haven, and there's a pass down there. Maybe if they have captured a Duergar, they can get some information, or maybe they might hear that a Duergar is living in Lonelywood, or maybe somewhere in Bremen that is not so evil, or maybe has given up his ways, who might be a source of information, or something like that. Or maybe there's some remote location out in the wild that is not on the map that the player characters have to go to speak to a Duergar who has run away from Zardarak's fortress, who might be have some good information. Or it could be somebody in East Haven. I mean, there could be some Duergar there that might be able to give them some better information rather than just giving them a location on the map. Now, as they get there, something unfortunate happens. As they approach, the doors at the top of the fortress open, and the Chardelin dragon is released and then flies north into Icewind Dale. Now, you note this is a huge construct shaped like a dragon made of Chardelin. It's actually weaker than most dragons that are huge, far weaker, but it's built for this campaign, and it's worth a lot of XP even for a 6 level group. It's pretty dangerous overall for this kind of group. When this happens, the players may be approaching the fortress, the dragon flies north, and there's a clear indication that it's flying directly to the 10 towns. The player characters now have to make a serious choice. Do they continue to the fortress, which might be pretty close by, maybe only, say, a half mile away, or actually, it could be even less than that? Or do they chase the dragon and back to the 10 towns and try to warn the 10 towns? It'd be interesting what the player characters do. My group said, let's go to the fortress and see if we can find some way to stop this machine. Other groups might go back to the 10 towns. Their decision here is very important, and it is a major decision to let the player characters make because there are consequences to this decision, and D&D is a game of consequences, although some players don't tend to think that way, but it is. If they go to the fortress, and I'll note chapter 4 deals with the dragon itself. So, we won't talk more about the dragon at the moment. We'll deal with that next time. The fortress itself, assuming they go there or maybe they go back there, is, as you can see by the player's map, is set in 3 different levels. Each one is, well, the bottom one is the biggest level, then the middle level where they come in is the middle level, and the top is quite small. Most of the enemies here are duergar, and again, if you're using the spy statistics, give them their invisibility ability at least, or their enlarge ability. The adventure even describes many of them as starting as invisible, so it doesn't work if they're just the spy statistics. Zardarok can be found in a random location, and it's likely he's going around the fortress, moving around, and he's a very active threat. As you go in, most of the locations are just have some duergar in them. There are a few spells, like you know, the player characters might need a knock spell to open the front doors, for example. As you kind of go into further, again, duergar guards, sometimes a large number of them. That's kind of standard. I mean, it's to be expected that there'll be a bunch of duergar in a duergar fortress. There are some secret doors. There's, quarters and all that where Zardarok lives or spends his time, his own personal treasure, a some dwarven script with a piece of paper that gives some you know sequences for opening something later on. It's actually a treasure vault, guard posts, including one of the invisible duergar, and the player characters might come across, and this is near the top as well. Uh, Grandolpha Muzart, she is somewhere in the fortress. She might be here, but she might be in a different room, and she acts more or less like a druid, like a duergar druid, and she's a moderate threat at best, but she's a good tie-in to Grockle Slug, which I think is a good move on the designers of this particular part of the adventure to tie that location into this venture, especially because Grockle Slug really isn't that far from Icewind Dale overall. Now, because this is the living location, there is a private dining hall and all that. As we're going through the different rooms here. Most of these locations are on level 2, but the Duergar live here, so this isn't just a place of battle. It's got their living facilities and all that, which is pretty well thought out. Now, going here, there is a dragonet made of Chartalin who acts like a pseudo dragon, which is kind of interesting, but it's nothing really major. As we go further in here, there is some tie-ins to the background of, if the player characters have a slayed tadpole, and the adventure suggests the tadpole bursts out of the player's chest during a situation here, perhaps while Grandolpha is eating dinner, and just a dramatic event. Here's the little pseudo dragon. It's like maybe a prototype of the Chartalin dragon. You can kind of look at it like that. You get some more quarters, things like that, a training room, things like that. Now, as you go to the top here, you get some Duergar hammerers. These are basically constructs that look like Duergar and are, I mean, there may be actually a Duergar built inside of it, but it's effectively a construct. And the stats for it come from the Icewind Dale Rime the Frostmaiden book. They're interesting. They're very melee based and all that, like way too many D&D monsters honestly are. As you go further, the main controls for the gates and all that are up on this level, and they're what they are. Now, one of the maps, I believe it's on the second level, one of the locations does have a little like map thing that allows the player characters to get an idea where the Chartalin dragon is. It's how the Duergar track its progress. The player characters might think that moving the little icon on the map might make the dragon come back. My player characters thought this is what would happen. It is not. It merely tracks where the dragon is, and if they move it, it likely will go back where it came from, but it's a neat little device connected to the dragon magically, or the Chartland dragon. Now, going to the Forge level, this is the largest segment of this adventure. From experience, if the player characters make too much noise and have too many doors open, such as if they're in the right area over here, a lot of enemies who are all over the western side of this map are going to hear them, and it could lead to a very large battle. Now, you may note that these little platforms where it says plus 20 feet, these are little battlement platforms over the forge area, and there are some duergar up there who will be on alert. They're like guards, and there's some other creatures in this area as well. I think number 33 is some cells, and there's some other stuff here. We'll get to it in a second. The entrance to the Underdark is over here, which the Duergar might fall back to if they have to. But this whole area is built very much like a fortress. There's battlements here and arrow slots the Duergar will likely try to use. It's a well designed area, but there is a good chance, and this did happen in my campaign, that this could go from small area fights to the entire area being, getting involved in the fight if the player characters just make too much noise, or they rely on fireballs which make to cause a lot of light and make too much noise and shake the foundations of the building, that more enemies nearby will be alerted. That's just likely what would happen if the player characters do that. There is an Umber Hulk that is a captive of the Duergar. There's also a Mind Flayer who's cannot use its psychic abilities because part of its brain has been removed, and its uh, tentacles have also been removed, so it can't do its tentacle attacks. It's kind of one of those things where, do the player characters want to just kill this thing, or it has a name, by the way, but or do the player what do they want to do with it basically? There are some rust monsters linger about, eating some iron ore that came out of the Underdark. There is some Quaggoth spore servants. There's a Myconid here that is, I think he's a sovereign actually, who is a captive. But nonetheless, there are some interesting Underdark creatures that are also down here, and it does go into the madness system, which is in the player's or DM's guide. I'm not sure if it's in the 2025 version, but it is in the 2014 version. You get the Quaggoth's Den where they live, and you get more than just Duergar at this point. So it's a little bit of variety in all. You do get the stats again for Grandolpha, and she will be found most likely in one of these areas. Various guards, and again, this could lead to a very, very large battle very easily. You get Zardarok himself, who kind of looks like a mad Santa Claus in some ways. Um, his stats, if you're using the stats in here, it kind of builds him kind of like a Duergar. Like you get some of his resistances, but I don't believe it includes his ability to turn invisible or to enlarge himself. Keep that in mind. He should have these abilities, and he originally did have these abilities. I don't know why they're not included in the stat block, but there's something he can do. He clearly can enlarge himself because he is enlarged in that particular image. And you also get some Duergar hammers. There's just a lot of Duergar in this area, and it could lead to a just very big fight or a very complex boss fight. Now, there is some information on the forge and things like that. I won't go into detail about it. There's some giant lizards. There is some just additional things that are tied in here. There is a Goliath warrior who's captive here. He's part of one of the Goliath clans to the east. The player characters may or may not have gone there yet, but if they haven't, tied into Worm Doom Crag, this might give the player characters more information on that if they haven't gotten the chance to go there or haven't heard about that yet. Now, there is a Deep Duergar temple. Deep Duergar is a Duergar god. However, the priest is not really a priest. He's a barbed devil using a hat of disguise to appear like a Duergar. And you'll see his image right here. His name is Clondorn. Fantastic image of this particular quote unquote Duergar. He's a devil in disguise, and an interesting enemy at that, and the player characters might get a hat of disguise as a result of it. There's some decent magic items in this adventure overall. Now, there's of course a torture chamber. They're Duergar, they would do things like that. Um, just guest quarters, more hammers. There is a treasure vault with a bunch of different chests in it, and the key to opening up all these chests the correct way is found in Zardok's quarters. If the players are smart, they might use it, or they might use a knock spell or something else. They're mechanical, very mechanical though, and get these things open. There's some decent and unique items here. A drow cloak of elvenkind, which melts if exposed to sunlight, which won't be a problem for most of this campaign. A wander web, things like that. Now, overall, the longer the player characters spend in Sunblight, especially if they try to spend the night here, the more damage that's going to happen in Icewind Dale. The more of the 10 towns that are going to be destroyed. I won't go into the details of that just yet, but when we go into the next chapter, you'll see why that is. It's called Destruction's Light, and the next chapter is very event based, where this adventure, unlike the last two, is just a large single location dungeon crawl fortress. If you the first two chapters of Rime the Frostmaiden are a lot of smaller locations scattered around the 10 towns and scattered on Icewind Dale. This is the first time the player characters will have a big location to explore. And likely, if you're running your campaign as little 3 to 4 hour segments, this is going to be 4 or 5 different segments or different sessions, basically. Maybe a little bit more, depending on what the player characters do. I have heard stories of groups that decided to wander off into the Underdark because there's an Underdark entrance here. There's another one in the Gem Mine, also in the first chapter of Icewind Dale. I've heard of groups doing that, just wandering off in the Underdark and forgetting about Icewind Dale. Uh, the DM could honestly put in a storyline that say there were other people over the last year or so that came to Icewind Dale and tried to stop some of the things that are happening, but they also wandered off into the Underdark or something like that happened. That's apparently more typical than you would think in this campaign, but it could happen. Overall, I think this adventure, this chapter 3, is a 3.5 out of 5. It's nice that it's a change of pace from the first two chapters, and it's a much larger, more well thought out location, but it's a dungeon crawl. It's not a particularly unique dungeon crawl. It's 3 levels. I'll note, by the way, if you're trying to run this in Roll20 using this map, very specifically, you'll note that these grids here are, I believe they're 10 foot by 10 foot. They are. They're 10 foot by 10 foot, and if you try aligning these to the grid on the bottom level or any of the other levels, they won't align correctly. The bottom level might align, but then the medium or middle level and the top level will not align with the grid. I tried this many times. You might want to find a third-party version of this where these areas are segmented or separate. It might work out better for you. Otherwise, you're going to have some odd things with the grid. That's just with Roll20. You may be using other platforms as well, or you might be running this in person. But that likely will happen if you have that situation. Now, again, overall, it's a 3.5. It's kind of a standard dungeon crawl. It is good that it has a very much a purpose in the overall plot, although the duergar aren't the main threat in this campaign. They're just kind of a secondary threat, but it is a good adventure that will likely get the players, say, if they're 6th level, it might get them all the way to 7th level or close to 7th level. And it deals with the potential threat that a curse of darkness might have when a group of underdark creatures wants it to stay like that because they like it being dark. They don't want to be in the sunlight and they want to live on the surface in a land of darkness. They're not the main threat, and it's an interesting location nonetheless. It's, one of kind of a sub storyline within the overall storyline. It is nice that there are some unique stats for Zardarok and for Muzart as well. And there's a little bit of extra creatures in it, but there's not a lot of original creatures. There's not a lot of original items or anything like that. It's just kind of a standard dungeon crawl, but it works for what it is. But it doesn't stand out as an incredibly unique location. That being said, guys, if you like these reviews and you want to see more of them, please like this video and subscribe and stay tuned for more content.